Hello from Mount Carmel. Today I want to talk about something that is quite deep and personal that God has been putting on my heart, especially over the last week. And the title for the message today is "When I approach the throne of grace, must I leave my anxiety at the door?" And this topic came to me. It started with a question when Colin and I were having one of our times of catching up with each other after the kids had finally gone to sleep and we were both tired. And a question popped into my head and I asked Colin, and I said to him, when God looks at you, what do you think he sees? And I asked Colin the question, but as I asked it, I kind of thought a bit to myself, what does God see when he looks at me? And as I've shared on some of these other videos, for the last year or so, I've been on a process of accepting myself, connecting with God, coming into his presence, healing from many broken places. And I've come to a place where I like myself, where I feel comfortable in my own skin, which I haven't always done. And there's been a lot of healing and restoration. So when I pondered to myself, what would God see when he looks at me? The first thoughts that came to me, I thought, he would love me and he would affirm me and he would see all of my strengths and giftings and everything that's wonderful about me. And I was sure that's what God would see when he looked at me. But I decided in any event, the next morning when I had my own devotion with the Lord, I thought I'd just ask him the question just to see if his answer agreed with what I thought his answer would be. I said, God, what do you see when you look at me? And his answer surprised me. I clearly and immediately, deep inside my spirit, heard the voice of God saying, I love you so much, but you're putting up so many barriers to me and you're pushing me out and you're not letting me get close to you. I was surprised. I was surprised by this answer because I've spent so much time recently deliberately coming into the presence of God and enjoying the experience of his grace and his forgiveness. And I've heard him speaking to me, and it's been a deep period and times I've had with God. So I was surprised that he should say to me that he feels this resistance and this blockage. Then I thought some more, and I realised that in recent times, as I've been connecting with God more and coming into his presence, I've very often started my devotion just by closing my eyes and just seeking to come close to God. And very often in those moments, I get a picture in my head of God standing, it's a human form, but it is God. I know it's God in my mind's eye. Standing beside a small building, this figure standing with his arms out like this. And I regularly see that image of God just standing with his arms extended. That I see that as soon as I start to come into his presence. And with that image, I experience this grace and love and acceptance. But last week, as I thought more about God's words, I realised that that's where the picture stops. In my mind, I love those feelings of grace and acceptance, but I stay looking at this God figure with his arms extended out to me, standing beside this little building, and that's good enough for me. But I never go into his arms. I never go into the building with him. And I thought maybe that's what you're saying, God. Maybe you're saying that's what I need to do, that I need to actually come into your arms, not just see your open arms of love and believe that you love me, but to really come into your embrace, to come into your throne room. So I then tried to do it. In my devotion, I said, okay, well, I pictured myself moving towards God, moving towards his open arms, and particularly I pictured myself coming into the home. He was now standing inside this room and he was beckoning me in. And I realised something as I was standing there. I realised that I couldn't get into the room because my mind couldn't switch off from all the things I was worrying about. I was holding this box full of anxieties, burdens, complex problems I was trying to solve, things I felt I was responsible for, and I couldn't get past it. I couldn't put this box down to go into the room. And I know other times in my walks with God, I've spent time trying to pray away anxieties and cast off burdens, and it hasn't often worked, if I'm honest. Those prayers of praying to get rid of this thing I'm worrying about, or to release this burden, very often cause me to fixate more on those things and less on God. So there I was standing at the room, God was beckoning me in. Here was I holding this box of anxieties, and I realised I could either stand there and try and put the box down, and I'd probably be standing there well into the night time, rebuking all these troublesome thoughts and trying to put this thing down and cast these things off to come to God without my burdens. And I knew I would never make it into the room if that's what I was doing. And so I looked in my mind, the image I had in my mind, I saw God beckoning me to come in with my box. And I realised that I couldn't bear to put this box down, because the things I was holding in it were things that were precious to me. They were problems that I didn't want to forget about, because they were precious things that I wanted to find solutions to, and they were responsibilities for people that I love that I took seriously. They were not things I could bring myself. They weren't just arbitrary worries. They were things that were very, very valuable and very important to me, even though they were causing me pain and feeling like a burden. So I felt God saying, you don't need to put those things down. You can just bring them into the room and bring them to me. And I brought this box full of burdens, responsibilities, worries into the room. And I felt God say to me, where do you want to put your box? And he offered me maybe to put it in the corner of the room or up on a shelf somewhere. And I said to God, no, I can't. It's precious to me. These things in this box, they're very, very valuable to me. I can't just put them away right now. And God said, I said to him, do you mind if we use the box as a table in between you and me? And we just put the box there and it sits as a table. And somewhere in my, I don't know, something inside my head was screaming out that no, you can't put your box of worries as a thing in between you and God. That makes no theological sense. But I felt God's grace saying, okay, let's put your box of worries and use it as the table, and I'll sit here and you sit here. And when I put this box of worries down between us, I realised it didn't block my intimacy with God. In fact, it was at knee height. It wasn't blocking seeing my vision and seeing God eye to eye. And God extended his hands over the box, and him and I were holding hands, resting our hands on my box of worries. And the intimacy was incredible. The intimacy of being loved and accepted, even with everything I was holding, those things being part of the conversation and being part of what God was holding gently as well. And for some period, in my mind's eye, I was sitting holding the hands of God, resting them on my box of worries. And then I left. I finished my devotion and I came out of the room, still carrying my box. But as the day went on, and as I opened the box and looked at these tangled knots that were inside it, I realised that something in the box had changed. Being in the presence of God, that somehow these things, these responsibilities and problems, they were easier, they brought me less anxiety as I approached them, from the experience of having been in the presence of God. And just to share one other connected event that happened, that was just this morning actually, but along the same theme. All of the last few days I've been trying, since that time, I've been trying each morning to really come into the presence of God and go into that room and sit with God. And this morning, once again, I knew there was a blockage, and I knew that it was hard for me to go into the room. And the thing that I was carrying in my arms was my son Yakov. And Yakov, just a couple of days ago, he received a diagnosis that wasn't unexpected, that we had a strong suspicion that this is what we would find out, but it's still a lot to process. He was diagnosed with autism. And so this morning as I came to God, my mind has been thinking and feeling and processing so much to do with Yakov. And I knew I came to God and I was holding my baby in my arms. It wasn't a box of anxieties this time, it was my little boy. And then I heard the voice of God say to me, "Give me your baby." And I held my baby and I gave Yakov to God. And this was such a deep step. Sorry about the tears, I've even got tissue here. It was such a deep step for me, because it's very hard for me to find people who know how to really hold my baby boy safely, who know how to look after him and to listen to his needs and help him when he gets stressed. And so God's saying to me, "You can give me your baby." I realised that God knew how to hold my little baby boy. And the feeling of safety and confidence that gave to me, being able to hand my baby over to God and watching God in his arms, holding my baby. And then I saw that God's arms were so big that he was holding Yakov in one arm, and in the other arm he wanted to hold me, and there was plenty of space. And so for the next period of time, I saw myself sitting on God's lap with Yakov securely held with one arm and me securely held in the other arm. And the feeling of finally being able to let go, to trust, to know that God can hold our burdens with sensitivity and delicacy, and he knows how to handle our problems. I just knew that it was a profound revelation that God gave me, that we don't need to cast off all of our burdens before we can come into God's presence. We don't need to put aside all the things that are troubling us. We can bring them to God, and God knows how to hold them, and he knows how to hold us. And he is more gracious and more loving and more able to accept us with everything that we bring than we ever could imagine. I'm going to have to go and find a tissue now. I'm a little bit embarrassed that I've got this emotional, but I think that that's probably a sign that this is a message that God wants shared. And I just hope that someone out there is going to be blessed by what I've just shared. Amen.